Welcome to the Cost of Everything podcast. On today's show, we're talking with Kevin O'Grady, owner of Cognitive UK, all about blockchain and how it will transform the world of cost. I've associated a lot of the hype around blockchain, mainly around cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, but how does it apply in the world of cost and project management? That's what we'll talk about today. Quickly before we get into it, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on, particularly if you're listening on Apple. I would really appreciate a review. It gets the podcast to more people. But for now, here is my chat with Kevin O'Grady, all about blockchain. Thanks very much for joining me today, Kevin. I've known you for a little while now, but great to finally have you on the show.
No problems. Glad to be here.
We're going to be discussing all things blockchain and how that relates to cost and project management. But if we could start with your background and how you got into cost and project analysis.
Yeah, certainly. So I started many years ago as an electrical engineer working in West London, predominantly sort of Heathrow Airport maintenance blocks. Once I was sort of qualified electrical engineer, then I went on into building controls, building management, looking after building sort of heat and ventilating, air conditioning. I loved finding out what makes buildings tick and what makes a good building control. But the BMS work sort of took me all over the country. I sort of worked from McAlpine Stadium in Huddersfield down to the Folkestone Saga building. So I did an awful lot of travelling around, and I was the sort of senior project manager looking after the project finances, which is the part that I really sort of enjoyed, and the costing of projects, the analysis, the bid winning work, and liaising with clients. So I found out I sort of enjoyed that so much so that I actually went back to university. I went back to Reading University, the estate management, and studied surveying practice, which wasn't particularly easy with two young boys at the time and all that travelling. So once I qualified there at Reading University, I went on to work for EC Harris, working back at Heathrow Airport as a QS. I was there for 7 years and really enjoyed the work at Heathrow. Met some sort of inspirational, some great friends there, and I worked on Heathrow Terminal 2 from inception right the way through to final accounts. That was really insightful. Seeing a big major project from the feasibility, getting people into contract, working on through the whole project, and then looking after their final accounts and closing it out. So that was a great project, but unfortunately there was a bit of a downturn after that. So I decided to work in the Middle East for about 3 years with Turner & Townsend, working client side at Abu Dhabi Airport. And after that, I returned back to the UK, working for Arab as an associate director. So my role for associate director, I've been sort of pricing transport solutions globally, where I've been out to China, Shenzhen, Gabon, Uganda, and all over Europe. So that's been, over the last 4 years, it's been an amazing job pricing works on airport systems and rail systems, doing life cycle costing. I even had the amazing opportunity to meet the Queen, or present to the Queen at the RICS 150-year celebration. Good milestone. I've recently set up my own company, Cognitive UK. I'm a CEO for Urban Mass, and I'm on the board member for FABRI, which is the Foundation for International Blockchain and Real Estate Expertise, which is like as you'd expect, a distributed organization, being blockchain. It's not for profit. It's active in about 30 countries and about 100 regional chairs with over 5,000 members worldwide. So it's really gathering pace. And the London chapter is very active as well. We've got 2 great regional chairs here, and working as a quantity surveyor, like a costy, for most of my life, I can see the potential for blockchain, and I've been working on several pilots of blockchain in the industry.
You've got such a diverse range of experiences there, from supplier or contractor side to client side, and then understanding what needs there are within cost management for complex sort of civil projects and other type projects, and just the fact that you've managed to see it around the world, and then bringing it right up now to blockchain, which has been a bit of a buzzword. You see it being introduced in contracts at a very high level, and So I'm really looking forward to finding out and helping the listeners find out a bit more about blockchain and its applications in this field. So let's just start off there. What is blockchain?
So I suppose when people hear blockchain, they probably first thing that comes into mind probably cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. But I suppose if we go right back, the person who invented blockchain goes by the pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto, and Nakamoto stated he was meant to be started working on this writing code for Bitcoin back in 2007. So it's probably in the grand scheme of things, it's quite an early in its infancy and such still. But the application that we think of for the works that we do, which in blockchain that can be applied to our sort of industry, is more like a trusted ledger, a trusted record of information. And these records in blockchain are called blocks, and each block contains like a cryptographic hash of the previous block before it. So if you sort of imagine you've got blocks A to E, block B would contain a cryptographic hash of A, which is a timestamp and transactional data, so that each block is sort of bonded together by each other by cryptographic principles. So the reason why blockchain is particularly useful is because it has that timestamp on it. So then if you go back in history, I know that post Grenfell, they're looking at the golden thread of information, and having information that's got this digital fingerprint on it, it becomes key. And I suppose it accelerated from the unfortunate events at Grenfell that this could actually help find that information, and then hopefully, because it brings with it trust and transparency, hopefully before people would sign off on certain measures on a project, they'd think twice, because that information is going to be recorded, and it's immutable or uncorruptible. Just means that it can't be altered. The history can't be altered. It's not managed on a single computer. It's managed on a cluster of computers, which it's managed over millions of computers distributed worldwide. There's no central authority. It's not stored in one place. Anyone in a network of a million computers can own the information. The information's open, so it's information on the block is completely transparent for everyone to see. This is quite important if you're looking at payments or transactions in real estate. That's quite key and a benefit for it. And there's no real transactional costs. So the blockchain carries no transactional costs. It just passes information from A to B on the block, and it doesn't require sort of paying a third party to initiate that or to do that transaction on the blockchain. So that's sort of a key part of the unique record or unique history that's created over millions of computers on the net. But the security of blockchain is quite key. The fact it's immutable by design, it then cannot be corrupted. The data on the blockchain, it can't be able to go back. So imagine on a project where you've got different versions of a specification, that actual record when the first specification was issued can't be changed if it's called into question even 10 or 20 years after that specification's been issued. There's a date stamp, and that would link to an absolute clear record of what was agreed at the time. The fact there's no central authority that holds all the data sort of helps that information from being compromised. You could say, unless it's hacked, of course. So they say it's immutable, but there has been instances where somebody has been able to hack it through. But it's obviously a lot harder to get to those records than the current work we're doing today, the business as usual today. So, what else on the blockchain? The data on the blockchain is sort of identified by a public key. It's called a key for the data that's held on there. Everyone in an agreed network can see all the transactions by this public key. However, not everyone knows who holds the public key. So that way, that anonymously secures the key itself. And that's sort of like a sort of an overview of blockchain that I see. Is that sort of trust and immutability that can help how we use blockchain. But obviously it shouldn't be a sort of a solution looking for a problem as such. We should use this as only when it's particularly needed. If there's another way of storing a ledger or record that's secure, I'd particularly go down that route first. It should only be used where you get the
Yeah.
true benefits of blockchain.
So there's quite a lot of interesting points to come out of that. One of the areas that I'm looking at here is we're talking about sort of smarter contracts almost. There's a lot of administration involved in the contracts, a lot of areas where different steps need to be managed. There's the communication, even if you think about once you're in implementation, early warnings, compensation events, right through to final accounts. But there's so many different stages there where individuals have to be involved, provide responses. It has to be recorded. It has to be communicated. And one of the areas that I was wondering about was around smart contracts and how this ties in with smart contracts. Is there a link between the two?
And there is. We did a great pilot on HS2 where they looked with SAP and Tata Steel and IBM, and we did this pilot where we looked at where the specification at the very beginning of the project was issued to various parties, and HS2 picked up the contract themselves. They would approve it, come back into an Arab account. We would then sign it, and all the way through that verification took place, and it was like a digital fingerprint. It's almost like seamless. You don't see the work that goes on behind. All you see is the hash that's created, the digital fingerprint that you get for each transaction, and that can be recorded going back into time to prove when and who did what part of a contract. The offer and acceptance part is recorded. So we would offer up a specification. The client would say yes, he approves it, and that stamp goes in as a record in time. So a lot of the time in real estate, where people are buying houses or doing a simple transaction, that process can take an awful long time to get that authority and trust into the system. So if blockchain could come and help speed up that process, and I know big legal firms like Mishcon and others are looking into that, and they've actually the Digital Street have actually had a successful transaction in the UK, trialing a blockchain system to speed up house selling and residential selling. So that's a definite place where in real estate maybe it's slightly in advance to, say, construction sites or infrastructure projects. But I think with the works that HS2 has spearheaded, and I know other rail projects are spearheading and looking into this one, I think hopefully they'll catch back up.
I think we've all been in the situation where you're waiting for various steps to go through when you're buying or selling a house, and it just they're left wondering sometimes, why does this take so long? Obviously there's a lot of effort that happens in the background with conveyancing, etc., but you do sometimes wonder, because there is that element of trust right to the point where you've exchanged, and you can see that could be even more of a dicey issue when you're talking about large sort of infrastructure projects and exchanging contracts and what services are being delivered. I think the other side of it that you kind of touched on there, but I just wanted to ask, who are the main players really in terms of providing this blockchain technology? Is it the management information system providers? Is it the same people, or is it a whole new different set of suppliers?
So it's a huge market, the blockchain. So you've got lots of SMEs, lots of small startup companies, and if you, being part of Fabri, you get to see all the different applications that different blockchain startups bring. You've got the big players like the SAP and the IBMs. They're fantastic at it, and they've got some brilliant systems. And the pilot that we did over 2 years on that major rail project was great to see, and great to see the code writers they put in. But very much the industry is very much like blockchain itself, where you can use bigger applications or smaller SMEs in the market to do both those activities. So I think on the payment side, we were quite lucky that we worked with an airport client that was looking to run blockchain to track the payments on site. This particular airport client, very forward thinking, and he wanted to improve the trust and transparency throughout his own supply chain. So if you can imagine sort of the transfer on a construction site that doesn't go through the bank. Instead, you can actually pass it direct through a blockchain encoded money to the person receiving the other end. So the main contractor doesn't actually receive the contractor's physical payments. He would receive the contractor's token. There'd be no benefit in slowing down the transfer of the funds. There's no benefit for him to hold a token. There's no interest held in withholding money. Not that I'm sure contractors like doing that, but there'd be no benefit in slowing down these funds to the SME. And the SME would have full transparency to see where in the chain his payments were. He would see where the approval of payment, because it's not a physical transaction, up to the point where the actual SME receives his token. And the main contractor could reduce his token, say from he'd been authorized to be paid 20% in this application. The main contractor can still reduce that down or increase it to 30%. The SME would get his payment at 30%, then he could take that back to the client's bank and then cash that in. So that therefore means people are actually embarking on a more trust basis onto the project. Even if you don't do a token and payment still flows through the industry, each element of that, each sub-consultant or subcontractor would know where his money is. So there's no Chinese whispers, oh, the main client hasn't paid me, the main contractor hasn't paid him, or you'd know exactly. You'd see on a distributed system where your money sits in it. And unfortunately, we would have started that pilot, but I know this has been piloted on quite a few projects at the moment, and the BEIS and a few other government authorities are looking into that as a potential way to help the payment within our industry.
It's a huge area that's been an issue about payments and late payments of smaller subcontractors, and an issue with maintaining liquidity. And it almost seems like the tokens being a sort of Bitcoin guarantee of payment, and another fascinating way of building trust. But I mean, it's the notion of trust within a contract. At the end of the day, it's a contract, and everyone signed up to it. But it's almost like releasing that payment, but as a token. It's what you've all agreed on. It builds on the trust.
It certainly does, yeah. The fact that people know that it's going to be recorded, I think, makes people transact more ethically, because they know that this is going to be recorded and it's transparent. You've taken out the benefit or uncertainty, and then maybe more contractors will come into the market. We know at the moment banks are starting to reduce their lending to contractors because their profit line is lower. Their chance of getting payment is harder through the industry. So they're becoming less attractive even to raise financial backing. So they know that they can maybe work with another industry that gets paid a lot quicker. So the fact that they're not getting paid, they're getting harder to get finance. It's all like a ever decreasing circle for contractors out there. And hopefully this could actually start bringing some more transparency and trust, that people will trust that they will get paid. They'll trust that the money will flow through. And even if they have financial difficulties, the fact that they know that a payment is due and they can show it to their bank saying, look, this is the system. It says it's 4 to 5 days, and then the payment is due to me. And historically, it's always been paid on time. You take that to a bank manager, maybe that's the 4 to 5 days or the week that you'd get grace, where maybe a bank says, look, I can't see the money coming forward for that reason, I'm foreclosing on you. So there's hopefully, by providing it upstream even to your lenders, and it might even help more SMEs in the market, and that can only be a good thing.
I think it also seems to show from sort of a cost intelligence perspective as well, where one of the key challenges is bringing that information back in to your organization. So thinking of if you're a tier one contract organization who then subcontract works, maybe on a lump sum basis, but then releasing payments for specific tasks and activities, and then communicating that up the chain to the client organization. It helps provide that single source of truth that is often a key challenge. And so have you seen anything which is about how that information is then recorded and then reused within an organization?
It's quite funny. We're currently on a pilot at the moment. We're working with another very forward-thinking client where he's looking about trying to unlock circular economy on his project. It's a major UK rail project, and they're looking to try and demonstrate and obviously look at the benefits from recording and putting a digital stamp on the assets that are being created. So the pilot will start from April and it goes on to about August, and the pilot's looking at one specific asset type. So we're not trying to boil the ocean of looking at every component on a site. So just look at one particular asset, and we've selected a cladded panel, and obviously for benefits of linking back to the Grenfell inquiry, that fact we can look at a cladded panel and track its provenance right the way through, answers quite a lot of questions. But that wasn't the main purpose of the pilot. The main purpose of the pilot is to make sure at the end of life, which could be 60 or 100 years' time, that the information is there such that the main client, whoever that may be, or the FM contractor, which might be the 15th or the 20th FM provider, by the time it comes to the end of life, has the information such that he's able to disaggregate that asset, find out the elements which would go to landfill, and he would know how to reuse as much of the materials as possible. Now that's if you're talking from an ESG perspective, which is environmental, social and corporate governance perspective. Now financiers are looking at ESG portfolios. The fact that they can say that the asset itself has got a reusable life, that in itself would
Yeah.
mean that the asset value is higher.
It does all tie back into exactly like you say there. What's the value of the organization? What's the asset value? Often you get large infrastructure projects. I'm thinking in terms of nuclear, and they're just seen as a liability at the end of life. One of my previous guests mentioned about sort of a national materials data hub, and essentially that cities are becoming urban mines. Essentially, there's a particular tonnage of type of stainless steel in that building, or a type of structural steel in that building, or any type of material, and you need a central way of recording where that is and when it's likely to become available again for that reuse and that purpose. So it's fascinating from that side of things, how you're talking about sort of long life cycle or long life asset management as well, and how that can sort of changes the game, but also enables things like the circular economy, which are becoming sort of talked about much more widely.
No, definitely. And I think at the point of award and the specifications being agreed, at that point, it's a fait accompli, isn't it? You've actually designed an asset. You've asked the contractor to provide it. From that point, there's no turning back. You're going to have an item. And if you're not asking the right questions at the point of tender and award, that will influence if it's going to go to landfill, or if it can be reused, or if it's got carcinogenic properties, or if you're not asking those questions at the tender stage, how can you think in 60 years' time this isn't going to be a problem for somebody else to solve? And I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
it's that long-term thinking, isn't it, that people are starting to get into. And I know one case study that you may have heard me mention before. It's becoming the famous rubber mat story, where I was asked by a client to do a life cycle costing of the rubber mats within an entrance to a train station, or many train stations. They thought, before we go down the route of buying rubber mats in all these train stations, that they would do a life cycle costing to see if this is the best route. So they did a life cycle costing. And you would have thought that because they're quite cost effective rubber mats, you use them for 2.5 years. After that, you can turn them over and get another 2.5 years use out of the rubber mat. But ultimately, at the renewal stage, that rubber mat goes to landfill. There's no other alternative for the mat that they've got, goes to
Yeah.
landfill. So if you had to change that every 5 years going forward for all the stations, yes, it's a cheap initial outlay, but the long term, especially with levies and costs for landfill going up and up,
Yeah, if you consider the whole value chain.
consider the whole value chain. So we looked at maybe a conglomerate floor tile in the entrance, and although the point cost initially is higher, within 5 to 10 years it was far cheaper to put in the conglomerate floor tile. And then if you got a very good floor tile, you could rehone that floor tile and resell it at the end of life. So say you put a 50 mil floor tile, rehomed it, you could sell a 40 mil conglomerate floor tile in 60 years' time. So what is the actual cost of that asset if it's got resale value? And I think that's parts that maybe by tagging assets, by recording them on blockchain and having the information stored such that the initial intent is to reuse it, and every FM provider and every time it changes hands, that building, that people have got quality data accessible so they can then determine what the designers and the original intent of the building was. So we can now reuse that bit. They know that that part could be reused. Or even if the steel within the building is tracked and recorded, would you actually buy that steel or would you lease the steel? If you lease the
Yeah.
steel, you could actually, the person, the original manufacturer, could get the steel back and then resell it again and again. So it opens up this as a service offering, doesn't it? And I
Yeah.
think now
Yeah.
we have the technology to record information, and where, like your previous speaker was saying about recording data and finding out where it's stored. I think that's now the point where we can look at as a service for materials and for assets on construction sites, and maybe looking more to not building something for 60 years when they only needs to be a 20 to last 20 years. Doesn't need to last 60 years. Maybe we're over specifying stuff. Maybe
No,
we're
absolutely. And it changes exactly like you say there. It changes. It's almost like you then go into the Uber model, but for infrastructure. And what aspects do you own, and what aspects are you leasing? Because that then completely changes the cost of these commodities as well. There's a spec that a lot of materials need to be developed towards and produced for. Once it's in that form, it has a value. But if you then destroy at the end of life, essentially its first purpose, then all that work that's been put in, all that effort, all that energy, all that cost has essentially become a liability. It's sort of like how Philips have gone about starting to look at circular economy principles, where they don't sell fittings and light bulbs, they sell light, and that
yeah,
completely changes their model.
Schiphol Airport does that, doesn't it? It's very clever.
Yeah, and that would require a complete change in our philosophy towards how we view these as commodities, versus, as you say, that they're services and they provide a purpose that has quite far-reaching consequences. What's not so much blue sky thinking would have been blue sky thinking probably about 15 years ago, but you get enabling technologies like blockchain that are making this possible. The other side of that is, what's the likelihood of uptake for this type of blockchain technology for the smaller contractors? Are there still barriers there to the adoption of this technology?
There's quite a few probably barriers to blockchain. As we spoke earlier, there is no middleman. So banks themselves are seeing a revolution in the services they're providing. The fact that people can sign up and their information isn't held by one source, it's more distributed. There is the argument that there is inevitable job losses as the banking industry moves to more of a distributed authorization than, say, a central authorization. So they don't need as many employees, so that the middleman, taking out the middleman, that's the middleman is a job, isn't it? That's somebody's industry, that's somebody's work. So some of the people that would block against blockchain is in that sort of service industry. The lack of regulation, so regulation has to catch up in the sort of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency space. Is already experiencing some repercussions of the lack of regulation. So cryptocurrency crimes are proliferating at quite a pace. That's something that needs to be looked at, and I know the UK government's looking at some of those regulations at the moment with British Blockchain Association. So that's good to see that they're moving into that space. The amount of disruption it can bring to the industry, so therefore people are determined for the willingness to actually accept it. You have to take people along with you with any change. You've got process, you've got people, you've got policy. So the government are probably there in the policy bit, but the people will have to come along to say that this is the reason why this does it, because it brings and promotes more trust. And there's been a lot, I've seen a lot in a lot of press about the fact that blockchain technology takes up a lot of speed and verification. So it's actually the energy that blockchain consumes itself is being called into question that this is actually bringing in more energy and it's not as sustainable as not doing it. I mean, the problem is people are measuring the transactions on a block and not looking at the transactions as business as usual, to have an equal argument either side. But each one needs to be checked in its full evaluation of both sides. But there is some blocks to blockchain. The word blockchain itself can be a bit of a blocker, can't it? Because when people hear blockchain, they either switch off or they think, "Oh, that's just I just don't get it,"
Yeah,
type
yeah.
thing. When really, if we said it was an Excel spreadsheet with a padlock, I think people would be more accepting of it and understand its purpose. Its understanding is to be a more secure ledger of information, a more secure record of information. For us, that's our side. There is other parts that blockchain's used for currency transaction and everything else, but that's not the sphere that I've tried to work within. I'm just looking at a far more secure transaction that would make people work more ethically, because they know that their actions are being recorded on something that couldn't have been corrupted to get it in the first place. So that's
that almost tamper proof and
tamper-proof. Yes,
trustworthiness of what's stated there. I think it's a huge potential leap forward, and I think we're scratching the surface with this, and there's a lot to take away from what we've discussed so far. But where can listeners find out a bit more about specific applications of blockchain we've talked about, but I guess more widely as well? Any recommended sort of next steps for researching this area?
I mean, there's an awful lot on the internet about blockchain. I mean, Gartner's did a report there saying that 20% of top global grocers will use blockchain in their food safety and traceability by 2025. So every day there's a new publication saying that more people are adopting it. The World Economical Forum have got a project called Redesigning Trust, Blockchain for Supply Chains, and that's the World Economic Forum. And they've got partners such as 85% of the world's cocoa supply chain are in there. You've got Hitachi, 60 transport ministers across the world, and a lot in UAE. UAE seem to be very forward thinking in their blockchain development. So for myself, it's just trying to get involved, I suppose. Fabri is a great place. A good selfish plug there, because I'm
It's
a
all
bit
right.
of
We'll
bit of
drop the link in the. We'll have the link in the description.
Fantastic. Yeah, so welcome to get in touch with either direct to fabri.org or kevin@fabri.org, and I'll put you in touch with the London chapter. Or if you're overseas, there's many different chapters all across Europe, Germany, Italy, New York, South America. Australia is very big, so there's plenty of places to get in touch with your local chapter and help understand or bring your information to that to help. It's Fabri is a not-for-profit. There's no profit in it. It's just a community of people that want to share stuff in order to get better outcomes. Or people are welcome to drop me an email. I can give you my personal email if people want to get in touch and ask me questions on it particular, or if they've got a client that's particularly interested in it. I think
I'll share your LinkedIn profile rather than your personal email, just in case
okay.
you get some unsolicited
Yeah,
emails.
no
Um,
worries.
but no, I really appreciate that, and thank you so much for coming on the show. I think, what is your one takeaway message for the listeners on blockchain and its applications to cost and project analysis?
I suppose I always go back to a very French philosopher back in 1847. He not my words, but his words. I wouldn't take credit for it. He once said, "If you don't measure it, you can't improve it," and I think that's fantastic for all commercial managers. And if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And we do need to start measuring the business as usual and seeing areas where we can improve it. So, sort of many years have passed since 1847, but with all the technology and the data we're now starting to look at, we're now not only looking at measuring cost, but looking at measuring value. There's so many projects coming forward today that I know of that are asking for the capital cost, the operational cost, and the carbon impact and the social value. So I think us QSs, or the QSing fraternity, have got a lot of work ahead of us. We have to shape the new generation of people coming through to measure value. And I think that would be a fantastic legacy to pass on to the next generation, to help them measure the value. I'm working with the government on the value toolkit at the moment, And I think that's going to be fantastic for public procurement, that you can't just measure on the cheapest value. It's got to be done on the social, environmental and natural impacts, as well as the capital cost. So more life cycle costing, more proper evaluation done at early tender stage can only be good for us in the industry, I think.
It's a tricky area, contracts and cost, and you need to try to develop trust, and blockchain looks like a really important enabler to support future projects in this way. Thank you for listening and have a great week.